a rapidly changing world, technologies are transforming migration and border governance. When used in line with international human rights law, digital technologies can facilitate the speed and scope of migration procedures. They can enable migrants to remain connected to their families and communities, to make complaints and bear witness to abuse. Yet without robust safeguards, technology can hurt human rights and aggravate power differentials inherent to migration processes. Biometric data collection, processing, and sharing is now common in many migration and border processes, often stored in large, interoperable, and insecure databases. Visa applications are often automated. Algorithms flag individuals as possible threats based on unclear criteria and with little transparency. Emotion detection systems that claim with little scientific evidence that they can detect thoughts, feelings, and intent are being increasingly used to justify migration decisions. Drones and automated recognition tools are used to surveil extended border areas, deterring arrivals and enabling pushbacks. As a result, people on the move are being put at risk of discrimination and harm with little accountability and means of redress. For better or for worse, digital technologies are part of our collective future. We need to both seize the opportunities and address the gaps in human rights protection. The design, development, and implementation of digital border technologies do not arise in a legal void. They must respect human rights. Incorporating human rights safeguards into migration and border governance is essential to prevent and mitigate harm by these technologies. Migration is first and foremost about human beings. Let's work together to ensure that digital technologies are only used in ways that uphold the human rights of all people on the move.
Welcome to this side event session on the brink of a new era, navigating the future of tech and migration. We'll get started now while people are still coming in from the lunch break. What we want to do in this session is to provide, as Malin said in the opening, a 360-degree view of the use of tech in migration management. Thematically, we'll touch on its use for border management, integration and asylum, and humanitarian purposes. We also have a panel that brings together expertise from different disciplines and stakeholder groups to engage on the topic from also different perspectives. Finally, what we want to do and to reflect on in this panel is where technology has the potential in terms of its use in the migration field, including with regard to the EU Pact. We heard a lot about that this morning and want to discuss that here as well. But also, as we saw in this Office for OHCHR video that started the session, we also want to reflect on its limitations. So whether they be legal, technical, or even operational limitations in terms of how technology can be used in this field, understanding, of course, that technology itself is not a panacea. So I want to welcome all the panelists here. Thank you for being here today. Starting with Craig Damian Smith. He's the co-founder of Pairity and director of policy and research. The Pairity is a community-driven platform facilitating refugee resettlement and community sponsorship, and also conducts monitoring and evaluation around integration and social cohesion. To his left is Lorenzo Rinaldi, the head of Business and Stakeholder Relations Unit at EULISA. Previously, he was with the Italian Ministry of Interior Division, dealing with AI for law enforcement, digital forensics, biometrics, and new technologies. He has particular expertise on Eurodac, which we heard also some of our panelists this morning referencing its importance in the upcoming PACT implementation. And he previously served as the chair of the Eurodac Advisory Group. Tuba Bircan is here as well. She has a statistician background, and she's associate professor at the Free University of Brussels, where she leads the AI Migration and Society Lab. She was the scientific coordinator of the Hummingbird Project, which conducts research to map and understand changing migration flows, including also new methods to forecast emerging trends. Mr. Ashraf Abushady is also here to her left. He has an engineering background and serves as the Senior Advisor for Digital Transformation and AI at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. There, his focus is to help shape and implement innovative solutions to foster sustainable industrial development, and he works also on the intersection of AI and new technologies in the border management field. And finally, we have Marc Geer here as well. He's a mechanical engineer as background, and he also is the Senior Global Operations Director for Fragomen and works there on improving operational efficiency and technology innovation for the firm. He's been also there the chief architect of many of Fragomen's technology initiatives. So welcome to all of you. Thank you again for being here. And I want to then just jump right into the first question round. As I mentioned, we want to discuss here the potential uses of technology in terms of migration management. And based on each of your areas of expertise, I was wondering if you can then reflect a bit on where you see this new potential, either in terms of new technologies or in terms of new methods for analyzing big data. Starting, Tuba, with you.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks. It's really great to be here, really the best venue ever, I think. So the topic is pretty long. We have very short time, so I'll try to be very pragmatic in my points. And I think it's really important to say that the broader talk, let's say the theme of AI, technology, and migration is at the end should be narrowed to what can we do with it? What can policymakers really get out of it? What we do see now, I mean today, is that we can see the new tech and AI and big data either to be used for improving indicators or developing migration statistics, the models, understanding stocks, how many migrants there are, how many will come, and of course the migrant integration. But there is another pillar, I think my colleagues will also talk a bit more about that, is AI at the border. The automated decision mechanisms, smart borders. So in fact, we can talk about different approaches. And it is really important, based on all the discussions today in the morning, is that when we talk about the utilization of these things, it's easier to say than do, because the impacts on Eurodac and EU-LISA, I think, will be discussed further, but it is about multi-modal data integration. So let alone the AI and the new indicators, when we think about the regular traditional migration statistics, we do know that the data aggregation and harmonization on EU level already causes several challenges, what is been happening on the national level to the international level. But to cut it short, what we do see that mobile phone data can be really useful. We are working with satellite data and Earth observation and imageries. We are working with, we were working more with the social media data. I think it is something to be discussed later about the role of industry, because when we talk about all these, particularly the social media and the mobile phone data, we are talking about big tech companies. So the satellite data through ESA or NASA, we can really talk about data access, but one of the topics about how to use big data for migration is about who have access to that data, under which conditions. I think you are all familiar with the restrictions, what happened after Elon Musk took over Twitter. So in short, there are several studies, both from the assessment feasibility studies and academic research, showing that different data sources, big data sources particularly, can be used very useful. But I'd like to wrap up with saying that the machine learning techniques, which are part of the AI methodologies, are super useful when we improve the efficiency and the predictive power of the models. Because when we presented our results in the former years, most of the policymakers end up asking questions about the predictive models. So how can we know what's going to happen? How many people will be there? Shall we expect more people after this Palestinian-Israeli war? What does it really mean, the climate migration? How many people will come from Africa? So we really would like to know a bit more about the future. We really want to estimate the numbers for preparedness for different reasons. I have to say that the new improvements in the models can really help us to improve the models to understand things. But on the other hand, we should also remember that these predictive models and AI is based on the data at hand, because they are trained with the existing data sources, so they are less powerful for the major crisis. So when you train a model with the data prior to 2014, they do not really predict the flows of 2015 because this shock of the Syrian war were not considered. But yet, now we are standing in a position where we can talk about, can we combine different models? And with the new generative AI and natural language processing, maybe we can use different types of sources. Like, if you look at the news, if you look at the qualitative studies prior to 2015, it was there. We were talking about the uprising tension in Syria as of 2010. So now there is a long way to go, but at least we can say that it is pretty promising that the forecasting in terms of understanding the numbers and the inflows can be possible. I'd like to end with some brackets because we will come back to, I hope, later. But does it really mean that these new technologies, with the full potential realized, can also become an arm for more predictive policy? So what are we going to do with these predictive models? That's the most common question that I get. But who is it serving to? I think, considering the AI, we have to be fair that it is valid for every single methodology. It's not only about the AI or new tech. So it is really about, as long as we are relying on evidence as a quantitative information, it really means that who is going to do with that bit of information is a political matter. So talking about the potential, we have to distinguish that. We will discuss the challenges as well, but there is a potential. So maybe we can find ways to leverage the benefits of these new technologies to understand these complex dynamics, because from all political standings, everybody today agreed on one thing: migration is a complex phenomenon. It is complex, the dynamics gets even more complex, and we would like to get a better grasp of it. So in short, I think big data in general and the AI methodologies can be really positive, let's say, improvement in our understanding for the indicators, statistics, and the models.
Thank you, Tuba. I think that gives a really good overview and a good kickoff to this panel. Now moving to Ashraf, maybe you could also add your perspective on potential in the border management field.
So thank you, Maegan, and thank you all for inviting me for here. I think in general, technology is usually a very controversial topic to discuss in there. Nowadays, we feel that we are surrounded. Life is much more stressful. We are in a tense situation. Records and everything around us is trying to get to us, and technology is very fearful. But luckily, and as you rightly mentioned, I am an engineer. I deal with numbers and models and facts in there. The facts say that if you look at the bigger picture, humans live the best era in their life today. And they live the best era of their life because of the industrial revolutions and because of technology. This is how we are able to get where we are today. We live a lot longer than we used to live before. We are a lot more healthier. We have a lot more money than we had before, even though that the perception of it is not there. We always like to say, at that time it was better. But reality is different. Reality is now we live the best time of human history in there. Going back again to the actual technology and application. I mean, one thing is that it is going very, very rapidly. If you consider Facebook, when they first launched, in order for them to reach their first 1 million users, it took them 3.5 years to get there. ChatGPT, when it launched, in 5 days, they were able to get 1 million users. If you're familiar with Threads, which is now the competitor of Twitter, it took them 1 hour to get to 1 million users in there. So definitely the pace is much faster, But together with the pace, the productivity has increased a lot. I had a project in United Arab Emirates with the Abu Dhabi government in there for security and using AI at that time for monitoring passengers' behavior at the airport in there. The Abu Dhabi airport gets around 50 million passengers a year. Imagine the quantity of numbers where you basically have the cameras everywhere in there. You put a dot on the passenger from the minute he leaves the airport until the minute he arrives at the immigration officer in there. You analyze the pattern of behavior of how the person is walking, how he is moving in there. You measure their body temperature. You check facial recognition. Until the time that the passenger reaches the immigration officer in there, there is a traffic light system with green, yellow, and red. And these are simple indicators for the officer to say, like, if that he needs to take more action or the passenger has normal, regular behavior in there. And all that is done totally automatically and removing the bias from the officers themselves. And that was the initial trigger for that project in the first place. Now in Europe in here, the entry-exit system, which some people love it, some people hate it. Again, it's an IT system and it will keep being delayed because it's an IT system. And we all know IT systems are not the perfect ones in there. But a lot of the features which have been added to the EAS now is using technology in it. All the analysis of the movement, including the prediction of saying what constitutes a suspicious behavior in there. How would you say that somebody is having a human trafficking behavior in there? All this now is being done through models. And the main purpose for that is to remove the personal bias in that. I like some stereotypes in my head. I would add my bias into the system. I will influence the outcome for it. So we have to see until the 10th of November if it will be launched or not. But that would be another thing. Thank you, Maegan.
Thank you so much. I think that also gives us some food for thought also going forward as we think about how these systems feed in or are part of the PACT implementation, which we'll get to in a moment. But I want to turn to the private sector and see also how you view technological innovation in your field. Marc.
Yeah, thanks. And again, just thank you so much for having us here today. I think we tackle it from a slightly different perspective. We're in the labor migration business. Right, we often joke that we're the largest law firm that nobody's ever heard about. But from a firm standpoint, we're investing very heavily in generative AI, or in the AI space, but predominantly around the Gen AI, digital identity, digital wallets, verifiable credentials. And for us, we're utilizing it to navigate very complex landscapes. Right, so just within the EU, the rules around posted worker notifications, the rules around social security are very complicated and vary from country to country. You know, you've got the directive sitting at this level, but the implementation, the process is very different from a country-by-country basis. And what we find is that our clients absolutely want to be compliant. It's just really hard to navigate. So we're using Gen AI to help them navigate the complexities around that. And we have our own vector database. We probably have the largest immigration database of any company in the world. And so we utilize that in terms of helping our own clients navigate those complexities. And those complexities, as I've mentioned, posted worker social security, but I'll give you a real case. You know, there was a renewables energy project off the French coast. And one of the vessels involved, 500 crew on board, right? So if you look at the rotations, probably 1,000 people. But what you had on that was you had engineers from the Czech Republic and from Hungary. You had subsea welders from the Philippines and Indonesia. You had a British crew, right? And so what you have on that is the level of complexities in terms of trying to navigate that and plan for all the eventualities is incredibly complicated, because the rules, as we know, for the engineers from Eastern Europe are very different to those rules for for those coming in from Indonesia and the Philippines. And so their ability to plan accordingly it's really complicated. The days of using Excel spreadsheets is long gone. So that's where the Gen AI component really comes into its own in terms of navigating all of that. We're also investing, as I said, we're also investing very heavily in the digital identity, verifiable credential space as well. And the reason for that, and I'll just give you one example, is, on posted worker, none of the authorities are issuing a verifiable credential for posted worker. But where does that become important? If we look at the continuum of what we're doing, we're allowing people to come and run their assessments, very personalized. I'm a US national, I'm based, well, I'm not really, I mean I am, but I'm a US national based in Germany on a valid Italian EU ICT permit, right? And I want to go to France, right? At the end of the day, you'll probably find that the outcome of that, besides everything else, is I probably need posted worker notification or social security or both. And so the ability to ingest information from a wallet, to be able to run the assessment, right, to get the correct answers coming out and to issue that verifiable credential back to the wallet again is something that we've invested very heavily in. And so the question is asked, okay, so what? So you have the verifiable credential. But again, if you look at the solutions we're proposing to industry, where we can actually have the relying party log into the middleware, use our middlewares as they want to be able to validate that somebody is compliant in country, right? So this is a very big part of where our firm is investing in that digital space. So I think to the point that you made as well, we're also using the AI models to anticipate for the clients. We've got a project off the coast of Brazil. We've got a project in Austria, right? What is the best combination of individuals to use that's going to have the least amount of resistance to getting in, right? And simple things, right? From the document procurement side of it, right? What's going to be easiest? Is it easier to procure and legalize documents coming in? I'm not saying that's what it is, but to legalize documents coming to the EU for individuals coming from the Asia Pac versus individuals coming from Central and South America, right? So it's that in terms of using AI to help from a workforce planning perspective, right? So that's really from a firm standpoint. I mean, I can talk to you for hours about it, but from a firm standpoint, that's really where we're investing, and the obvious gains from an efficiency standpoint, right? Using that to understand, well, what are the various government systems looking like? In Government Portal A, they call it an A, and Government Portal B, they call it a B, but it's actually the same thing. So it's a really heavy use on that, and it's also heavy use on the technology to help our own team, right? In terms of processing applications, in terms of understanding, going through what has somebody got on a resume, right? What has somebody got on the employment records to extract those important components that we need from an application standpoint. So that's where we're going from a Gen AI and digital identity perspective.
Super interesting. Thanks for that overview. Then now I want to move to Craig, also to see from your perspective in terms of refugee resettlement and integration perspectives.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, thank you to the conference organizers. Thanks for putting the panel together. So the organization I work with, Pairity, we provide tech and data solutions to optimize and scale migration management and to perform iterative outcome evaluations of it. What that means specifically is that we work with partners and we co-design programs to use large amounts of data and preference matching algorithms. And we use that to match migrants and refugees to sponsors, services, work, and housing. And our systems, we use quite granular data like census data, labor markets, housing stock, and education and training opportunities, as well as the preferences, skills, capacities, and needs of migrants and receiving communities, so both sides of the kind of matching equation. And preference matching algorithms, the type that we use, produce what are called stable matches, and that's matches that look across the whole of populations to maximize the use of resources. And that's given assumptions around resource constraints about very unique populations and the very unique characteristics of receiving societies. And these types of stable matches have 5 or 6 major advantages. One of the major ones is that they remove biased assumptions in matching, even from civil society organizations that are very well intentioned. There are still inbuilt biases there. They consider very large amounts of data, and that kind of limits the human resource constraints to scaling in any of these matching programs. It diversifies receiving locations away from a few major cities, which is a major issue in Canada and the US and around Europe as well. They also improve the reception readiness from receiving communities as well as migrants' program satisfaction by making the match rationale transparent to both sides of a match. In so doing, they also increase retention rates, so limit the cases of secondary or out-migration from where people are matched. And finally, they set baseline metrics for outcome evaluations, which is not only important for iterating the quality of matching, but it provides transferable lessons across different jurisdictions and cases. We measure our outcomes using several different indices and metrics. I think the most important ones here, what we call the best match rate, the human algorithm agreement rate, and finally resource utilization rates. On that resourcing side, there's been a lot of conversations here about solidarity, about what it means to have different types of locations take part in things like the pact or internal solidarity mechanisms. Interestingly, we found that despite how complex all of this is, housing allocations and up-to-date housing allocations have proven to be one of the main kind of resource constraints to scaling matching programs, and also one of the most computationally complex ones, because housing stock and reception in, say, asylum placement centers are constantly changing. Or that could be things like homestays, like Homes for Ukraine in the UK, et cetera, as well as permanent housing stock. And by kind of iterating and using the data that we pull in and making sure that the preferences of both receiving communities and people on the move are part of one of the main variables in how we weight variables in the matching algorithm, we've been able to increase the resource utilization rate depending between countries and use cases from 83 to 98%, which means that we can optimally use scarce housing stock or scarce numbers of refugee sponsors, for example, and then we increase satisfaction and retention from doing that. And I guess just like a very final note that, and in line with a lot of the conversations about implementation of different migration management strategies, that scalability of any model, of any technology is really crucial for meaningful solidarity. And the tech and data interventions that we use and we talk about really kind of sit where the rubber hits the road between big overarching policy mechanisms and actual programming that takes place on the ground, which I'd be happy to talk about more in the next round.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think here we heard a lot about the breadth of possibilities in terms of the technology itself and how it can feed into different policy or programming objectives. I think that's a really important place from which I want to also jump into the potential for the pact. I think there's a lot of expectations of what technology and different systems that are being developed can or should do. And I'd like to also discuss here where you think technological innovation fits in terms of the pact implementation, starting, of course, here with Lorenzo.
Thank you very much for the question. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. Well, you mentioned the pact. I would start by saying that the new pact on asylum and migration that has been approved in 2024 really put a central supporting role on EULISA systems. So I represent here EULISA, which is the European agency in charge of the operational management of a large-scale IT system. And I think that this word large-scale means a lot. So we have a great role in the pact, a great supporting role, of course, because the pact calls for
an increased exchange of information, a timely exchange of information, in order to streamline asylum, migration, and border management. And of course, one of the, I would say not one, the building block number one for the implementation of the pact is the development of the new Eurodac. What is the new Eurodac? Eurodac is the former asylum database, and it will be the cornerstone. It will store, the new one, store and provide information to member states to really streamline and assess quickly the status of the migrant, and thus allowing the, let's say, the main aim of the pact implementation. But there is another important outcome of the pact, and this is the reason why there is this image. That is that finally Eurodac will join the interoperability ecosystem. That was really expected for years, because indeed Eurodac joining the interoperability family, as we call it in EULISA, will allow to complete the network of data available to the member state authorities to assess the status of, let's say, the third country national entering the EU. It will, so what do we see in this slide? I'm not going to comment the slide. I just want you to have a clear grasp on the complexity on the one end, but on the potential of the informations that are behind, because we will have all these systems that are managed by EULISA that will not work anymore in silo, but they will allow member state authority under strict data protection requirements and data security requirements to cross-check information on a need-to-know basis. So allowing this information, regardless of the fact that what are the biographic data declared by the third country national, because there will be a key factor that will help reconcile all these status, which is the biometrics. So this is all these complex architecture lies and relies on biometric as an horizontal layer that will help streamline and reconcile all the data. And there will be new IT facilities that will unleash a full potential, as it was saying before, because we will build the common identity repository, which will be at the repository of identity data of third country national entering the EU. Will build a very strict and complex tool in terms of data protection, which will be the European Search Portal, which will be the way in which member state authority can access and make queries in such an amount of data. But coming to your question, I really see and also the video, I really see technology in this field as an opportunity to streamline the process, an opportunity to reduce the time of assessing an asylum request, an application of international protection, because it will really allow the quick retrieval of such an amount of data. And coming to the new Eurodac, let me focus on that. Eurodac will be a complete new system. So we also need to go beyond the current understanding of the system. It will not anymore be only a system supporting asylum. It will be a system supporting resettlement, a system supporting relocation, a system supports the monitoring of irregular migration within the EU, because it will allow finally trace the so-called secondary movement of a stayer, of people illegally present in the EU who goes from one country to the another, because the new Eurodac regulation will imply the obligation for member state authority to register those data in the system. So this will really provide insightful information for policy making, let's say, to support for decision. And there will be a lot of new data in the system. First of all, new biometrics, not only the fingerprint, but we will also going to collect the face that in a few years will be also searchable by a face recognition system. We will have what we call the identity data, the biographic data. Nowadays, Eurodac is only a fingerprint database. We will have also nationalities, family names, and this will also help to analyze the trends of people moving across the EU. And we will also have the business data, what we call business data, that will really help the asylum management. For example, the country responsible the country of relocation. That will provide member state authorities for those, indeed the data needed to apply this balance between responsibility and solidarity.
Thank you. I think that also links up very well with Craig, what you were saying, and maybe coming back to you. I wonder if you could also talk about kind of the nitty-gritty of the implementation process, how technological innovation can fit in there.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. So we're in the process of preparing a working paper on the role of tech and data when it comes to PACT implementation, and there's this need to strike a balance between the high-level policy and, like you said, the nitty-gritty of how things like matching programs can work on the ground. I think one of the important things to note is that the matching systems, the type that we use, are policy agnostic. These matching systems can work across a range of policy pillars, whether those are solidarity mechanisms within the EU to distribute refugees and asylum seekers between member states. That doesn't need to be a wholly humanitarian principle or labor principle. It's completely possible and doable to bridge the two and to meet member states' needs and get better outcomes for displaced people. They can also be used in routes-based approaches or mobility hubs like safe mobility offices that are working now through Latin America to help make better matches, but also help attenuate irregular migration trends. They can work in what are growing complementary pathways from third countries, like labor and educational pathways, or simply for labor migration pathways from countries of origin. Essentially, like the computational, ethical, and practical considerations of the nitty-gritty, those are transferable across use cases. And it's also important to note that with emerging tech like AI and machine learning, that large-scale mobility isn't actually a barrier. Large-scale data makes matching better. The more options you have and the more variation you have between populations, the better matches you can get. And we've had kind of two main lessons over the years of implementing these programs in terms of that, of the lessons of actually implementing them on the ground with partners, and those are around data legibility and data accuracy. It's important, we've learned, very important that matching data and data that goes into deciding where people will be relocated need to be legible and understandable by civil society organizations and governmental partners. That's something as simple as co-designing usable data dashboards and portals to understand that participants actually ensure what's going on. It allows partners to check and approve how matches are made, to present partners with biographical and demographic data so they're better prepared to receive the people who are coming. And why it seems intuitive, many of the other kind of matching programs out there use AI, which in turn kind of black boxes decision making. And we think in line with EU data protection and EU AI and algorithmic fairness principles, that showing the work, essentially, of how matches are made increases the chances that matches will be accepted by partners, but also improves outcomes over time. In terms of data accuracy, I mean, to put it bluntly, garbage in, garbage out. Collecting preference and demographic data from people, especially in third countries or when people are on the move, can be challenging, but the cost and availability of all of the emerging tech tools that are there mean that those barriers are decreasing rapidly. And I'll just end by saying that there's a few examples of where this nitty-gritty really works, and that's the idea of, rather than, for example, in a labor mobility pathway, only looking at the characteristics of a principal applicant and their labor migration or their labor background, it allows you to think about the whole of household, so the rest of a person's family and how well they'll do in terms of their integration outcomes in a potential receiving society, which again seems like a simple consideration, but can have major ramifications for retention, where people end up. If you think even in the Canadian case, which is this exemplar of good migration policy, we have major problems with immigrant retention, and a lot of that has to do with household aspirations, rather than whether or not just the principal applicant has a job waiting for them.
Thank you. I think this gives us a good also perspective on the potential for technological innovation in terms of policy goals related to integration, as you said, also protection related goals, those related to irregular migration. But one of the other elements in the pact that I think is really important, and we'll hear a bit more about later today, and I think also tomorrow, is the potential for labor migration pathways and skills partnerships. And I want to also turn then back to you, Tuba, and see how do you see the potential for big data in that regard.
Okay, so assuming that all of us are very familiar with the pact itself, I haven't counted the words, but it's talking about skills a lot. So we do need skills. Skill migration is a priority. And I have to say that when we consider this under the context of this new AI and technologies, I think we can again go for two different aspects. Because the first one is, we do not only need laborers, because we do know that Europe as a whole, also all the different member states, we have the labor shortage. So we need people, and the numbers are drastic. You know, like we are talking about 400,000 people for Germany. You know, like for, if I'm not wrong, for the Netherlands, it's also a couple of hundreds of thousands. So we do need people for our labor market to work, which also has an implication on our social security systems in general. But I think what we pronounce less frequent is that we are also struggling with skill shortage. If you look at the bottleneck jobs of the member states in the last 10 years, yes, there are some changes, but there are some, let's say, boned skills that are there. So we still need the same type of skills consistently and for a long time. So I guess it's really important to understand how we can identify skill, because when you look at the policy, it's a tertiary education. However, the bottleneck job says that we need plumbers, we need electrical technicians, which are not necessarily university graduates. So what big data and AI can bring there is maybe the new technologies can help us to go beyond the categories. What I mean categories is that when you go to Eurostat, when you check the skill migration or managed migration, you end up with remunerated activities, educational purposes, and family reasons as the major groups. And then we do assume that the economic migrants are the major skilled migrants, but skill is not related to the legal status. Our recent research, we show that there is a potential among the irregular migrants. So there are a significant number of irregular migrants in various countries which are skilled indeed, but the data gets lost, or let's say unseen, in the asylum procedures, because I think it might get better with the ELISA, let's say, harmonization, but we do know that the asylum applications are confidential, although we get, if I'm not exaggerating, up to their shoe sizes. We collect data from the applicants, but they don't really go up, so we don't know much about the humanitarian visa applicants' skills. But there is a way. Why? Because we can really approach it from a social investment perspective. If we need skills, we need to invest. And I think I was discussing with a colleague in the break, it's really about collaboration of various policies, because it's the labor market policies, it's the migration policies, education policies, even family policies at the end. So big data doesn't require, let's say, hardcore traditional statistics, and it might give us some concrete, let's say, suggestions or pathways. To give you a very concrete example, we are working with LinkedIn data, and with the people who agreed us to work with their data, we show that, particularly the family migrants, who are in statistics in the family migrant bucket, who are partners of skilled migrants, usually get jobs at the cost of de-skilling. So they get a job, assume that we have so many examples where they are managers, but they end up a specialist in a different country for various reasons. For language, for the labor market policies or family policies. So in short, I think these new approaches of various data sources, alternative data sources, and understanding the models can really help us to think out of the box, particularly about the skilled one. And the other part that we need to mention that I'm not going to elaborate is the impact of AI on labor markets, because it is also going to define what type of new profiles we're going to need, and it's going to have an impact on migration. With a study to conclude, for instance, we showed that the impact of AI on different labor markets, particularly the manufacturing, for instance, and logistics, led to change in the gender roles of migrant families, because males tend to lose their jobs and the women started to work in the regular. So I guess the impact and the understanding the AI and skill migration can be very beneficial in terms of understanding what to come and what is at hand today.
Thank you so much. What we've focused on up till now is a lot on the potentials, on where we can use technological tools, and what is possible, maybe, what we can see going forward. But I would like to spend the remaining time that we have here also talking about some of the limitations. We heard about it we saw it with the OHCHR video in the beginning, in terms of that, of course, we know implementation of new technologies must be in line with fundamental rights. There's concerns related to data protection and privacy, but of course we also understand access to remedy and other rights are also highly relevant. There's also concerns related to ethics, also concerns in terms of what the technology can actually do. Is it robust enough to do what we might want it to do? And also there's capacity constraints. Are people able to actually use these tools and this data that's available? I think the various interventions have touched a little bit on it, but I want to really focus on this now. What are the key limitations from your perspective shortly? Maybe starting again with you, Lorenzo.
Okay. I'll be very brief about that, but I will, as I said before, the PACT implementation and also in particular the Eurodac implementation will be very challenging, not only from you, Lisa, but also for member states. In terms of capacity, indeed, this is a keyword that, because the risk of underestimating what the PACT will bring in terms of managing of information, in building capacity, workflows, is really concrete. As I said, there will be a lot of more information to be collected. This means that member states should develop efficient workflows in order to allow their national authorities to speak to each other. Because indeed the system will be a case management system and it will work if with a timely entering of the data. Otherwise, we will not use the full potential of the PACT. This means that not only there should be a workflow and operational procedure in place to collect the data, but also workflow to share the data at national level. Then there is the issue of data quality, as you were mentioning. Data quality is essential. I'm not talking about garbage in, garbage out, because I really trust in national authorities, but if the data are not complete, it will hamper the functioning of the PACT. And then there are other things that member states should put in place, for example, cultural mediators, because when you have to interview the migrants and collect those completely new data of themselves, you will have to have cultural mediator also when people irregularly cross an EU border, not only when managing an asylum application. It will change completely the landscape of the operational landscape. Then there is a need for devices and tools. For example, we'll be collecting travel and ID documents, so we need tools. Member States needs tools. This may require time for testing, capacity, storage capacity. This is extremely important, not only from a technical point of view, but also to make it work. And then there is the capacity of resolving the so-called yellow links to indeed assessing with fingerprint expert, face expert, the real identity in case of doubts. And then there is the last point I want to touch. The new Eurodac regulation will call for member states to acquire biometrics of children. This is a quite sensitive topic, I know, legislation in place, but it will require a great effort from the member states in order to provide training, because the regulation is quite clear, the legal base is clear, I'm not going through it. We need a representative, we need people especially trained in collecting biometric data from children, which is not easy at all. So this is an important challenge for member states in terms of investment in the field. If you want to really unleash the potential of protecting for example, unaccompanied minors.
Thank you. I think those are some important limits also that we're often talking about the expectations that we have of technology, and I think it's really important to highlight where we need to proceed more carefully, where we need to pay some attention before we go full speed ahead, basically. So now I want to move to Ashraf. I wonder if you could also speak about the constraints that you see with regard to the border management field.
Sure. Thank you, Maegan. I think we heard a lot about privacy from the previous ones, and I'm sure it's in the brain of everyone who's thinking, okay, what is the now, where is my privacy? A system can see everything in there. But let me tell you a very, very short story about privacy and how it is really very relevant. In 2015, I was working for the World Food Program in South Sudan, and as soon as I arrived, they had a big issue for kidnapping, hijacking, carjacking, and everything in there. So at that time, I said, okay, we have to do some kind of tracking system. We need to be able to track personnel and assets for the organization. And I developed this system in there for Bluetooth Low Energy, and it was a huge success. I had literally people coming to beg me to be tracked. And in South Sudan, you're tracked 24 hours. So you go to the bathroom, you're tracked, you go out, you're tracked. But nobody had an issue with the privacy in there. And people were really wanting to be tracked. Jump forward, 2017, I came back to Vienna, I joined UNIDO, and they had a similar issue. They wanted a tracking system for the assets of the organization. And I immediately jumped and I said, I implemented successfully such a program in South Sudan. Let's implement it in here. And that was the end of the project. Immediately, when people heard about personnel tracking, everyone freaked out. Everyone said, no, you cannot do this. Where is my right of privacy? You cannot do this. And it was shut down within like a couple of days. It was only held for asset tracking. And even with asset tracking, that was a big issue to try to convince the staff councils, all the different people to say, like, we are not tracking you personally. But that's a different perspective about privacy. Where a security concern is there, then the privacy seems to go much lower in the hierarchy in there. But yes, the system will have access to a lot more data than we are used to before. We are talking now into the billions and the trillion data entries in there. So that will be a lot more. In addition, just the final point is the risk of increasing the digital gap between different countries in there. Mm-hmm. Technology has a cost, there is knowledge, and the fear is that so many will be left behind in this one.
Thank you. I think it's important also to highlight, yes, ethical concerns related to that as well. And then finally to Tuba, I want to also hear from you in terms of what are the key limitations from your perspective.
Okay, so it's a tough job because I think we discussed a lot.
We did.
But I'll try to summarize at least my perspective on three points. The first thing is we haven't discussed, but the pact has a lot in common with the acts. We have the AI Act, which is coming to power almost at the same time. It had the same struggling period, several proposals, but at the end, the parts relevant to the migration in the AI Act and Digital Services Act is that it explicitly defines AI applications for migration as high risk. very explicitly, and it says that we should be extremely cautious in terms of human rights, in terms of data privacy, in terms of non-discrimination aspects. So I guess it is not only about the AI Pact and its implementation, it will have very direct impact on the AI Act and its implementation too, which brings another layer and complexity, but I think it's also a kind of a safeguard. And there, these risk-based approaches are still a dilemma, because even from the GDPR, we do know that when it is about security, that we have heard a lot in the morning as well, a lot of doors can be opened. So with the migration being pronounced more and more with the threat, with security, with international relations, I think this kind of high-risk applications will be also discussed on tables a lot. But of course, it's about the fundamental rights. My second point, I'm not going to talk a lot on privacy because we had done, but which comes along and very important is the informed consent. And from the consent part, there are several critiques saying that, assume that you're a refugee in Rianga and they say you can get food if you agree to give your iris scan. And you have the freedom to say no, but we do know that here the consent is questionable. And second part that I hear a lot from various colleagues, practitioners and policymakers is about the informed part, because we do inform people, like for the member states citizens, we do know our rights, we can be learned, but there is a kind of this misconception of migrants as vulnerable groups are assumed to be extremely low educated, ignorant, so they don't know their digital rights and everything, which is correct up to a point. But the informed consent about the biometrics particularly is not any different than the agreements that you sign when you get a mortgage, which is written in 5 fonts, and many people here are quite highly skilled, but you are also in the phase that you can question your informed position because you sign it, you're assumed to be informed, but I think with the new implementation of this, like Eurodac as well, it is going to be about to what extent we know what we are signing up to. Last point is, big data is really, it's very exciting, not because I'm also working on it for a long time. I'm a data cruncher. I like numbers and everything works, but I think we have to be very cautious that numbers, big data, AI cannot undermine the qualitative insight. Because for us, we do know that nuances matter, policies matter, people's experiences matter, and we are talking about different contexts. A program can work perfectly well in one setting at one time, can be very different, so we should also consider the role of humans and the qualitative insights.
Thank you so much. So I hope this has given us a lot of interesting perspectives, some helpful considerations as we continue today and also tomorrow. I think it's important for us to have in mind these potentials, also the nitty-gritty, as we talked about as well, how technology can help really at the practical level, but also some of the limitations, whether they be also practical, operational, whether they're also legal constraints, ethical as well. Yeah, as I said, I hope this helps us as we go forward in our discussions throughout the next day and a half. And I also want to thank the audience here for taking time from your lunch to participate, and I hope we can also continue the discussions in the breaks. So, see you then back here soon. Thank you.